Roe vs. Wade. What did it mean on June 23rd of this year, and what does it mean since June 24th of this year when SCOTUS overturned it? Let's talk about it on an all-new bonus podcast entitled C28. CJ, start us off.
So I'll just be frank. I probably don't know as much about this as you do at this point. I know you've done some more homework than I have. So basically what I know is what the average person would know from looking at social media, right? So what I think I know about this situation of Roe v. Wade being struck down, abolished, whatever, is that basically abortion is illegal in America now. That's what I saw on Facebook.
Do you believe that?
So, well, that's what Facebook told me.
Okay.
Is that now no longer can any woman in the United States have an abortion.
Well, why don't
It's actually been removed. They took white out to the Constitution and just blotched it out because it was in the Constitution beforehand.
Gotcha. So you're pointing out the confusion that's happening.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So I am your average social media user.
Gotcha.
Today.
That's what he is.
In our episode.
The idea that we kind of discussed moments before is that there's so much to talk about, and we want to be tremendously sensitive because the nature of the conversation is very serious. I think it should be, and so we want to be careful with how we say things and assumptions we make. And I think that online, if you just stay online and you look at the Roe v. Wade case and it being overturned, there's a lot of bad information out. And so we could spend hours talking about the bad information that's out there and the good information that's out there. We could talk about the theology of Roe versus Wade. We could talk about abortion. We could talk about our own personal experiences and other experiences through this. We could dogmatically come in and like a bull in a china shop. And so we've spent some time thinking about like, what do we want this episode to be? What is our purpose in even putting this out? And just to clarify, and CJ, you can add or detract from what I say here, but my goal was to talk specifically about the recent decision on June 24th of this year regarding the Supreme Court of the United States overturning what is known as Roe versus Wade. And so what does that mean? So that's our topic here. It's not necessarily to talk about our beliefs on abortion, actually. It's what does this mean to the follower of Jesus? So hopefully by the end, we'll be able to talk a little bit about what this decision means. And so I think a good place to start, because of the confusion that you brought up, what is Roe versus Wade? How to get started? What's the story behind this? And I think that would help a lot of people, because I did go around in the last week and ask people, hey, explain to me what Roe versus Wade meant in the 60s and 70s. And there wasn't one person that gave me a good answer. There were people that knew in general kind of what it meant, but let's break that down so that we can at least start the conversation with good understanding. And if I miss something, an important part, feel free to throw in the comments what that is so that we can kind of learn. And maybe there'll be a follow-up to this, and we'll explain why I believe there's going to be a follow-up podcast to this. And then we can have probably a little bit more of a theological conversation around this. So part
of what I want to do, like bouncing off of what you said, is I have a small list of examples that are actually from social media, right? And comments or posts or tweets or whatever, of, I think, misunderstandings or disinformation or something along those lines regarding all of this. And so, like you said, part of my hope is that we can provide a little bit of clarity in the conversation, because a lot of what's flying around out there, I think, can be pretty overwhelming for the just average person trying to formulate some thoughts, right?
Yeah.
On what's going on. So,
well, and if there's such thing as a hot topic, a sensitive topic, this is it. And I'm putting the cart before the horse here, but I think part of the terminology that we've began to use around this conversation has created a false dichotomy in belief systems, in that when somebody says one phrase or another phrase, there are things attached to that we assume about that person on both sides, and it creates a horrible discussion environment. And so anyways, with that, what if we talk about the beginning of Roe v. Wade?
Okay.
So January 22nd, 1973, the Supreme Court issued a decision on a case, 7-2, that the due process clause of the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution provides a fundamental, what's considered right to privacy. And then underneath that right to privacy, they determined that it protects a woman's right to an abortion. And so as they had a case, and we're kind of working backwards, but they had a case, and they decided that right to privacy clause includes a woman's right to an abortion. The court also held and determined that the right to an abortion is not absolute and must be balanced against the government's interest to protect women's health and prenatal life. So
to interrupt there.
Yep.
Well, so if I'm understanding correctly, abortion is not explicitly named in the Constitution.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
I think that's important.
Yeah. So
it was an implication.
Yeah. So the Bill of Rights, one of the fears when the Bill of Rights were being added, and the amendments were added, is that if you get too specific on certain things, it's going to exclude other certain things. And so the intention of the Supreme Court is to interpret the Constitution and make sure those things are protected. The one we see often through the news is gun rights, right?
Yeah.
And there's these decisions being made about what guns are protected. Right to bear arms. What does that look like? Well, this is being applied to the right to privacy. Well, what about the woman's right to privacy to make her own decisions, private decisions, and how does that apply into the world of abortion? And so the Supreme Court of the United States had determined that a woman's right to an abortion is protected under that right to privacy, and because of that, it changed how the states could make laws. But we'll get to that in a second. So how did this SCOTUS, which is the Supreme Court of the United States, so if you see that all caps SCOTUS, that means Supreme Court of the United States. And so people say SCOTUS, and that's to shorten that long phrase and not get annoyed by that. A female named Norma McCorvey in 1969 became pregnant with her third child, and she wanted to get an abortion. She lived in Texas, and in that time, abortion was illegal in Texas with the exception of protecting the mother's life. So because it was illegal, she gained attorneys and filed a lawsuit against the district attorney, who is named Henry Wade. So one of the questions come up, right, when you hear that, you're like, why is it not McCorvey v. Wade? That's because for the sake of privacy, they named her Jane Roe. And so in all the cases, she was named Jane Roe, so it wasn't connected with her in real life, because she wasn't sure how this would turn out, or what kind of hate she would get from this, or what kind of support or that she would get from this. And so they changed her name. And so they changed her name in all the court documents to Jane Roe, last name Roe. And the lawsuit was filed against the district attorney in that district, who is named Henry Wade. So that is where Roe versus Wade comes from. The lawsuit alleged that the Texas abortion laws, which were basically, it's illegal, was unconstitutional. And there was a three-judge court assembled, and they together ruled in Roe's favor, saying that it's unconstitutional for Texas to ban completely abortions. And so then the natural question would be, well, that's not the Supreme Court. So what happens is when a lower court makes a decision, you can take that to the appellate court, which then goes to the Supreme Court. And so that's what they did. The parties involved then appealed this case in the Supreme Court, And this is when the Supreme Court then ruled and affirmed the lower court's decision that the Texas laws were unconstitutional and therefore they were overturned. And that is where Roe versus Wade took place.
And so what were some of the cultural implications from that moment on?
Gotcha. So part of the implications are this, that whenever there's a Supreme Court decision, there's a precedent. And what that means is that if the Supreme Court says that that says it is unconstitutional to allow any American to buy a 3-bedroom house. This is a really bad example, but I'm just trying to keep it super simple.
Yeah.
So that would mean that then the states can't go and make it legal for them to buy a 3-bedroom house. So like the precedent is set by that Supreme Court. And so lower courts can't make a decision that goes against that. And again, so we see this in the gun control, arena. Like there's various thoughts on what guns should be protected constitutionally and what do the Constitution have in mind. Well, the Supreme Court's job is to say, well, it does say the right to bear arms, but does that mean bazookas? Does that mean AR-15s? Does it mean shotguns? Does it mean rifles? Does that mean pistols? And so that's why it goes up to the Supreme Court, and then they make that decision. Now, say someday the Constitution says that it is illegal to ban AR-15s. That would mean that no states can ban AR-15s. And then the inverse is also applied. So if it's like, well, they say you can't ban 30-round mags. Well, then no state can ban 30-round mags. And so, and you go into, cars, transportation, right? How you move about the country. All these things go up to the Supreme Court, and they make these decisions. It goes up from lower courts to Supreme Court. To appellate courts to Supreme Courts. And so the reason why it's such a big deal that the Supreme Court does is that's the highest court.
And so let me interrupt for a second. So what you're saying is that the Supreme Court recently decided that Roe v. Wade, or that abortion is not a federally protected right.
Correct. Yep.
But the implication of that is not necessarily that now it's a federal crime.
Right.
So just because it's not federally protected doesn't make it a federal crime.
Exactly.
So abortion is not now unanimously across the board illegal in the United States.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And what CJ is pointing out is this confusion that because the Supreme Court overruled that decision, now it is illegal to get abortion. That's not true. What it means is that it's not protected in the same sense that specific case alleged. And so now we're getting down into what, kind of what that means now, if that is true. So what does that mean for us?
So
what are the changes that happen?
So one thing that I saw on social media is that now, because of the recent, I don't even know what the proper terminology is, like striking down of Roe v. Wade.
I think it overturned.
Overturned. Okay, perfect. So the overturning of that decision means that now women under any circumstance in every state are forced to give birth should they become pregnant.
No. So what it means is that the fear of some is that the possibility now is that can happen because it's not protected through that Supreme Court ruling. So now theoretically, and states have done this now, from what I understand, they have gone back to the laws that they had before that was overturned, and it is illegal in some states. So what happens is states can now decide for themselves what they believe about abortion, and so now that's scary for people who have various beliefs, because it can go back to being completely protected, or it can go back to being completely illegal. Mm-hmm. And so
is this Supreme Court ruling for the pro-life movement and lumping in, because there's kind of two trains of thought, I think, when it comes to is the general pro-life movement, and then also maybe what would identify as like an abolitionist movement, right, for abortion. So is this overturning, is it really something to celebrate then for those that are pro-life?
That's a good question. So I think that if you are pro-life, what has happened in the Supreme Court is monumental. So in that sense, there's something to be celebrated in that. On the other hand, it's like you can't celebrate at halftime.
Yeah, that's good.
And what the implications are is that now, if states make decisions, the reality is your vote has a bigger impact. Now, there's going to be a lot of well, I'm part of the political minority in my state or whatever, but I think we'd all come to the conclusion that doesn't mean you don't vote, and so
it's a victory, but not the victory.
Right. Because right now what happens, just because, the dam has broken, that means that now you have to do something with the water. And
wow.
You like that?
Did you just come up with that?
Yeah,
that was pretty good.
That's how you take a drink of that soda. And the truth is that what I am interested to see now, because there are different political leanings throughout the country, and I think that sometimes what is communicated through very immediate sources doesn't actually represent the United States as a whole. And where you see that a bit more is when states begin to have control over what's right and wrong and what's good. And I was listening to I won't say the show, but I listened to shows that kind of oppose my views on purpose, because I like to understand how people come to their conclusions.
Was it The View?
You can't do that.
I hear it from your office. No, I'm just kidding. He doesn't listen to The View.
So what he said is that nobody should determine for somebody else what is morally right and wrong.
Oh.
And
isn't he determining that for me?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
And also, nobody really actually believes that.
Yeah.
Because
makes a good tweet though.
There would be no laws and rules,
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to come to the conclusion and think rightly about things, and we can't make dramatic statements, because we do believe that we have morals, in what's right and wrong. Part of the argument, the counter argument to Christians saying that there would be no morality without God, the counter argument is yes, there can be, because we can decide together what's right and wrong. And so nobody's arguing that
only by common grace
that there is no right and wrong. True. The reality is what do we determine as right and wrong?
Yeah.
And I think that, for instance, we get down to, should somebody be able to come into your house and take all your stuff? We're like, no, that's not right.
No.
That's wrong. And then we're like, well, how do we enforce that? Well, let's make a law that says it's wrong. Okay. Yeah. And then what happens when they do it? Well, I don't know. We told them not to. No, you hire cops to, enforce the laws. That
unless it's Texas, then they're taking their life in their own hands, breaking into houses.
Yeah. So, you have these, you have a justice system that is supposed to take care of those things, right?
Yeah.
And obviously I'm talking about in a perfect world.
Right. And the Bible speaks negatively about whatever that host was and what he said. Is it judges? They did what was right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
And that's negative, right?
Yeah.
Things were falling apart. Things were crumbling. There was no morality because everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes.
Right.
Right. So it wasn't actually right. It was just right to them.
Right.
And
exactly.
That's like Old Testament, that's my truth kind of stuff.
Well, and we saw some new SCOTUS judges that were being interviewed, and some of the things they had to say is like my job here is to determine, as the Constitution has said, what is right and wrong, not necessarily personally what I believe is right and wrong. And I think that's hard for some people to wrap their mind around, because how can you separate the two?
Yeah.
And
I don't know that it can ever be done perfectly.
Right.
That is a problem, an inherent problem.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think that, the justice system's never going to be perfect.
Yeah.
Because my belief system says that because we're all sinful, right? And other people say it's because everybody's biased. And I'm like, well, there's probably some truth in both.
Yeah.
And so when the Supreme Court overturns that ruling, what happens is the floodgates open, water comes rushing in, and down to the states, and now the states have to deal with the water. And so what do you do with that? Well, there's going to be legislation, there's going to be new representatives. It's going to matter even more what your representatives believe is right and wrong and good and bad. And essentially when there is a political race that's happening, what it comes down to is everybody talks about what's right and wrong. So I'm not going to deal with this concept that we believe that nobody should tell each other what's right and wrong. We do that every time there's a political anything, every time there's a vote on anything, we all agree. That's why, you do think it's wrong when somebody goes and steals it. That's why you say it's wrong for somebody to steal my kid out of the yard. It's wrong for somebody to rape my child, right? We know that there's right and wrong. And so now we have to determine that. And there's different beliefs on that when it comes to abortion.
Well, I mean, even on the, I would agree unanimously, people believe that there's right and wrong because, I mean, one side will argue that it's wrong that they don't receive full free healthcare from the government.
Yeah.
Right. And they believe that's wrong, that they are being wronged.
Yeah.
That's not a real thing. Or that student loan debt isn't being forgiven. They believe that's wrong, right? Because they've been set up to fail or whatever the argument is.
Yeah. I just talked to a guy that said he doesn't think it's wrong to hit his wife because he's training her.
Oh my.
Dude, every single one of us would say that's wrong.
Oh my.
But yet, on the other hand, he thinks that's not wrong. So what do we do with that? Well, the way our country works is what does the majority of us think, right? That's how democracy works.
Yeah.
I know.
I was going to say, I can't say it on a podcast.
No.
what I want to do to him.
Yeah. I mean, he's obviously a minority and he was
ridiculous.
Completely goonery and ridiculousness. But anyway, so I mean, what we're talking about now is like that. Let's not pretend there's not right and wrong.
Yeah.
And that everybody believes there is right and wrong. And so then the tension comes is like within abortion, we believe there is right and wrong. And then I'll explain what I think the next level of the tension is within abortion. I think that when we're trying to determine who can own guns or not, or what guns are allowed, or how can people move about the country freely and what is restrictive. I think when we're talking about that, it's like, it's harder to move about the country this way or easier this way. Or that, owning guns, is okay and safe for the most part. We're trying to stop the few that are ending, mass amounts of life. And so we're trying to regulate that. It's not all bad, right? I think part of the reason why abortion is such a sensitive subject, is because there is no middle ground with it. That I think that there are people who think that what you're dealing with is life and death.
Yeah.
And I think that people there's perspectives that it's like it's murder or not. And so obviously it's going to be, it's all in or all out. And then what doesn't help is that we can't help but create categories, right? If you don't agree with my position on abortion here, that means you're over there. And it limits, check this out, I think it limits the ability to have discussions and actually have reasonable conversations. And what's difficult is that sometimes there are different belief systems that are in the majority and the minority. And one of the big tensions is, should the government have the ability to determine what a woman does with her body? On the other side, should a government be able to protect human life if it is in that woman's body? And that is where I believe these tensions come from. And now I will say this, the discussion really isn't, should it be banned? I mean, should it have regulation or not? Because nearly the entire country believes that there should be regulation on abortion. It's coming down to the states are going to end up voting on what that regulation looks like. And some states are going to say all illegal 100%. Some are going to say all illegal except for these considerations. Some are going to say completely legal. Third trimester, day before the baby's born, abortion is okay. And people, the way our country works, whether you like it or not, you have a responsibility in this country. So this got told to me one time, and it was eye-opening. In a monarchy, there's a king. And all the weight falls upon that king, and he makes the decisions, and he's supposed to try to keep his kingdom happy, but he doesn't have to. He doesn't listen to the people. There's no votes that sway anything. He hears what he wants to hear, but he makes the decisions that he wants. In a democracy, the people are king because we are the ones voting for who our president is, voting for who our representatives are, who our legislators are. And, we understand that it's not that how we see those votes being counted might not be perfect for us. Like we think there should be more weight for this, or we should take into consideration population, or geographical locations and population, and separate states more, or each individual vote should count, not groups of votes should count, or whatever. But the idea is that we're king here. We make these decisions, so that responsibility is on the individual voter. And what are the repercussions of that, would you say, CJ?
So, I mean, it does obviously add a tremendous amount of weight and responsibility to the individual. Something you said piqued my curiosity, because you talked about this idea of like there's going to be different belief systems in the majority or the minority at different points of time, right? And we're just talking about the United States here. Let me rephrase. I don't think that you could at all argue that Orthodox Christianity is in the majority in the United States right now, right? I don't think that Orthodox Christianity, not just in name, right? We're talking about like what people actually believe.
Yep,
not,
and I would agree 100%.
Not saying like I'm a Christian because I go to church on Easter and Christmas.
Yeah.
Doesn't count, right? I'm talking about people that are committed followers of Jesus. I think that worldview is very much in the minority.
Yeah.
And yet I see on social media over and over and over the overturning of Roe v. Wade, like the fault, right? I'm using air quotes here for those listening. Mm-hmm. The fault of that is being, at least what I see on social media, being laid squarely at the feet of Christians, which is confusing to me because it's not the majority view.
Yeah.
Right. And I really, as much as I do think that Roe v. Wade is a victory, right, and a step in the right direction, there's a very little bit of me that thinks that what God says about abortion had anything to do with it being overturned, right? Really comes down to what does the Constitution say, which is what their job is, right? So although I wish in an ideal world all of our representatives and judges were Christians and loved God and cared about his law and the gospel, I don't think that's what was happening here. I think it really came down to what does the Constitution protect? It's not this, even if they wished it had.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because really that Constitution, that SCOTUS decision was not based upon necessarily new material or anything like that. They're all the Supreme Court justices, they are bound by what is the letter and spirit of the law in the Constitution, and what is it meant to actually protect?
Yeah.
And
I guess my point is like that the overturning of Roe v. Wade, while it is something to celebrate for Christians, I'm not convinced it was the result of a Christian worldview that it happened.
You're saying that while it's a win in some sense for those who believe that abortion should be regulated or illegal altogether, that the decision was made just because sincerely it doesn't fit as a protected part of the Constitution.
Right.
And so now we're going to see really the results of individuals' votes which is holding more weight now.
Right. And so I guess part of, I don't know, I went through this phase of being like really excited about it, and then a little bit, I don't know, I struggled to say this, but like a little bit less optimistic still about the future, because I think that because the majority of Americans are most likely not born again Christians, that when it's in the state's hands, I think we will see it gradually get back to something similar to the equivalent of Roe v. Wade, or even less restrictive than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, so that's a good point.
Because now that it's back in the state's hands, like California is not going to vote to save babies. Like,
yeah,
realistically, right? I mean, we're just outnumbered here. And so I don't know. There's a part of me obviously that's like, that's great. I'm really glad that got overturned. And I do think that like instantaneously there will be lives saved because of that. Because instantaneously there were states that made it much more difficult, if not impossible, to get an abortion.
I saw an article today that said that there's a spike in vasectomies. I thought it'd be interesting to see. I mean, for me to see that connection, like what's going on in the minds of the men when abortions aren't allowed anymore. Like, are they being like, I don't necessarily think that like young men should go get a vasectomy because abortion is illegal, but what's going through the minds of these men. And
well, just the like, I don't know. I didn't know that, so I'm just processing that right in the moment. But that's really sad because their first option was to kill the baby that they made instead of taking responsibility of their own bodies.
Yeah.
So I don't like that, but that just is another reflection of like the poor state of masculinity and manhood in the United States.
Yeah. Well, and I think
I'm going to pass the buck onto a baby.
Yeah.
For my decision. Like, I don't know. I don't like that.
So I 100% agree with you. I'm trying to myself reserve kind of more of my passionate feelings for episode 2.
Okay.
So, and to reveal like where I'm at, the reason why I think this discussion part 2 is going to happen is when we start seeing the ballots. And then I think you're going to start seeing the passion and the defenses and the scriptural support and things, and also, to be honest, the pressure into sensitivities and how we go about these things. But that's going to happen when we start seeing things hitting ballots. That now I think that there is a responsibility, a heavy responsibility, to make to vote, with our beliefs, and we got to figure out what shapes that. So next part of the conversation that I wanted to hit, and if I'm skipping over something important, CJ, just stop me. But I think that much of this conversation, I believe, comes down to when life begins, and let me explain why. I think that we would all agree that a baby that is born and in the hospital, a mom decides to kill that baby, we'd be appalled. Hours earlier, that same person may think that was legal. Yeah. And
the biologically identical baby.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that, if that is true, and I think that statistically the vast majority of our country agrees that is true, that they are the same baby in those moments. Okay, so then what we'd have to do is then step back another month and another month and another month prenatally and try to decide, like, when does life begin? Because if we agree that portion is murder, and granted there's a few that, the minority believe that until that baby is physically, medically born, that it's the woman's choice. It's almost nearly non-existent in comparison to the numbers we have in our country, that view. The majority say that should be regulated because that is a baby. But then what we do is what about, 32 weeks? What about 28 weeks? What about 22 weeks? What about 20 weeks? What about 18 weeks? What about 8 weeks? And then, and we got to go back and we're like, well, what is going on with the baby then? What is going on with the baby then? And we try to make these decisions. And what it comes down to, I believe, for the majority of our country, so there's going to be that very, 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 very small percent that think any regulation of when the baby is inside the mother should be non-existent. That's nearly not even worth discussing because it's such a minority. But when does that life begin? When does it become not murder, right? And that's the discussion. And murder is a big word, but I use it because that is the discussion. That's why it's so heated.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there is this, while we're talking about such a heated, passionate subject, there are real women behind these decisions. And in a very real way, the father of those babies don't really have much say. And so it's really, the weight is put upon this woman to go through everything that childbirth is. And they got to make that decision. And in part 2 of this podcast, whenever it comes out, I would like to discuss those dynamics a little bit. And it's going to be a very rough discussion because no matter where you step, there's going to be a landmine there.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that some landmines are worth being stepped on, though.
Yeah.
And I just think that there's a loving and gentle and kind way to go about it, even though it still may hurt feelings. There's still a way we can walk through that in a biblical way and have this discussion. But I'm saving that not for now, because what I want to do is prepare people to begin thinking about what does this decision mean now for us? Just like people are going to be thinking, what does Roe versus Wade mean? What does the overturning mean?
It means more work for the pro-life movement.
Exactly.
I really think it does.
Yeah.
It means some of the work might be easier, but there's a greater quantity of work, I think.
So among the stuff we just talked about, including what the conversation is going to center around, and I don't know if you've ever had good discussions, some people call them debates or whatever, around abortion. Many times it comes through the government intervention, right? But that is always usurped by, when does life begin? Because we will go and we will fight to the death to save life, right? There are people all over the world that claim that. So then if we're going to go fight to the death for life, this is a conversation for the majority of our country and our world that would agree this is a fight for life. We just need to figure out when that life begins.
So check this out. We don't have to, maybe this is an episode 2 thing, but just to throw it out there. So someone on my friends list, right? Like on my friends list on social media, was interacting with this argument of like, we have to decide when life is. And their counter to that was, not all life do we care about. And they use the example of like a flea on a dog, right? We put pesticides on our dogs to get the parasite off of them. So they'll say, yes, it's alive, but it's a parasite that I don't want. Right. And like I said, this is like episode 2 conversation. But,
no, it's good stuff I think it's good stuff for this one. Yeah.
That's a dark place to be. You know, when we're thinking about like the life of a child being compared to a flea on a dog, like a parasite or a tick or whatever you want to compare it to. And there's been so many of these conversations that I've been witnessing on social media, and I really haven't engaged in any of them. There's things I just never thought I would have to engage with as an argument, right? Because I was pretty confident, like, okay, we established like what life is. Well, the argument's changing because I'm seeing people say like they don't care that it's life. It's a life I don't value.
Yep.
I'm like, that's a different conversation. Why don't we value this life?
Yeah. And you know, I think that lends itself to the third part of this conversation, that if it's true then that the water runs down to the states and the states have to decide what is done with the water and the people make the decision on what's done with the water, then that would mean that we have to be prepared now to intelligently have conversations around abortion and be able to say the right thing the right way. Yeah.
And have a robust enough theology to start to answer questions about why we even value life.
Exactly.
Right? Like, what is an image bearer?
Yep.
Like, what does Genesis say about what humans are?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that a lot of the confessions and catechisms from church history are really helpful in that area, because some of the greatest minds from church history have put their answers down.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's information out there already. Yeah. But I can imagine a Christian being faced with that argument, right? The parasite argument. It's a form of life I don't care about.
Yeah.
And really being stumped by that if they haven't deeply considered what it means to be human versus an animal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so although I think statistically it's a very small group, when you see prominent figures and now, you know, difference from 30 years ago is social media and YouTube and these platforms, you start seeing people say things that are literally shocking to your senses.
Shocking.
There was, there's people that say, that if that baby if I did give birth to that baby because I had to, I would just kill it after it's on the operating table.
Yeah.
You know, and you just would.
And this isn't unique in human history.
That is true.
I mean, there's tons of sources from history where Christians were the ones going out to these pits where the greater, more general culture would throw baby girls because they didn't value baby girls, right? And so the Christians would go and find these infants in a literal pit of garbage because they were thrown away like garbage, and they would go out there and pull them out of those pits and adopt them.
Yeah.
And so this is not this discussion and this fight is not unique to our time, right? It's just a matter of like how we steward this age-old problem of valuing life and understanding what life is from a Christian worldview. So I think that for me, looking back on the history of Christians who have defended life and who have cared about life and who understood it theologically, that gives me a little bit more courage, right, in these things. Because like I said, we're not having to reinvent the wheel. Christians have known what they believed about these things for centuries.
Yeah.
Since the early church, right? We could go back to the very early church and see examples of this.
Yeah, and so it's just and it's gonna, and I think I think part of your point is that it's gonna be a reoccurring battle. And right now, some people are super excited about the SCOTUS decision, and I think that we should look at that as if the ball was just the SCOTUS decision put the ball on the tee, and then what are we gonna do with that?
Yeah,
and I have no doubt that there are people, even Christians, listening to this. That are thinking, I hope these guys don't come out and tell me that abortion should be regulated because it's my body, my choice. And you know, I think that I think it's very clear where we stand. I mean, probably just listening thus far.
Yeah.
And I think
you probably hear it in our voice.
What I'd enjoy is if we were able to, in part 2 of this, when we really start dissecting, where we stand and scripturally why we stand there and morally why we stand there and the beliefs that we have, that these people can come back and listen to that also. Because I think it's a discussion that right now we have to have these discussions. And that brings me to another point. There have been many hot topic issues that Christians have fumbled. There's been opportunities there, and they come in very arrogant and cocky, condescending and rude and unkind and ungentle. And nearly every single one of those attributes on the inverse are supposed to be used in confronting your brother in sin. Like throughout scripture, when you see confront your brother in sin. So that would be, so in that example, we're confronting a brother that we've acknowledged that it's wrong. And we're like, they think this is wrong. And so we would think like, well, we come in and say whatever we want. You know, I got to say the truth. I say it how I want. And the Bible oftentimes cautions the believer as we're going to walk into what we believe is confronting sin, and it uses words like kind and gentle and palatable and with undergirded in love and things like that. And I think that this is a conversation that if we want any movement, any good conversation, any thought-provoking moments, that it's going to have to be done in gentleness and kindness and compassion and love and tenderness. And I think only in that place, that environment, can these conversations really happen. Because any 5-year-old can come arrogantly and condescendingly make a comment and shut down the conversation. And that's not our goal. And I think that part of what Christians are going to have to do, part of the point of this episode and the next episode we do on this, is that you need to know what you believe, why you believe it, and be able to articulate that to somebody with an opposing view. You got to be able to answer, like what Pastor CJ was saying. We got to be able to answer, why do we care about life in general? Because apparently that's part of the conversation. And I would argue that although I think it's a very, very small portion, that maybe that portion has grown a little bit. Although small, still had grown a little bit.
What worries me is the trajectory of the culture.
Sure, absolutely.
Like a culture that increasingly devalues life.
Yeah.
And increasingly is losing the line between not only creator and creation, but between higher creation and lower creation. And by higher creation, I mean humans.
Yeah.
Right? And lower creation, I mean plants and animals.
The Imago Dei.
Exactly. So as we lose that line between higher and lower creation, we are becoming animals, and animals are becoming, I almost said humanified, but that's not the word. I can't think of the word, but they're becoming people. Yeah. Right. And so as those two roles maybe don't switch, but there's this level playing field between values, right? On animals and humans. That's a much worse world to live in. And I do fear that is the trajectory currently of culture. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question I think that we're going to have to ask is not only why do we value life, but where does a life begin? You know?
Yeah.
And I know we already said that, but like that's part of what the Christian voter is going to have to defend, because that's part of like the conversation. And we would have to be able to articulate that. And also we're gonna have to be able to articulate to somebody why we believe there's right and wrong. And I think in the end, the conversation, if there's a reasonable conversation, it comes down to we all believe there's right and wrong. It's just where do we get the morals and how do we define what is right and wrong?
Yeah.
And there's different authorities by which we come to those conclusions.
Yeah. Okay. So one more thing.
Yep.
Following the analogy of the dam breaking and the water running downhill, the implications, right, that we have to deal with now that the water's flowing. What I see very commonly on social media right now is that Christians care about birth, not about the quality of life of that person after birth.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too. Yeah.
And so I think that is part of the water running downhill.
Yeah.
So is that fair as something to level against Christians? And what is the responsibility of Christians in light of accusations like that?
Yeah. Oh, this is a question for
That's
me?
for you.
Oh,
Yeah.
Man.
And we can both riff off that, but is it a fair accusation? I don't think so.
Well, I think so. I just had this conversation. Was it you? Did we talk about this the other day?
I think so. That's why I thought it would be easy.
was it you that was talking about like what are our laws right now and our provisions from states and stuff like that? Is that you that was talking to about that?
Not that part, but we talked about like the idea of someone thinking that Christians only care about birth and not the mother or the child after birth.
Sure.
Is like maybe the most ridiculous characterization of any people group I can think of.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big statement, right? But that is like, it's so blatantly false.
Yeah.
Every church I've ever been a part of, right, very much involved in pregnancy help centers, that welcoming in single mothers, right?
Yeah.
Being willing to take children that no one else wants. I've seen that everywhere.
Yeah.
That I've been a member at a church.
So,
and like I said, it's part of our heritage also, right? So we can go back to church history and see that consistently.
Yeah.
Mueller, what's his first name? Gosh, is it Richard Mueller?
I thought it was Robert.
I can't remember. Anyways, a man from church history that is known for setting up orphanages, right? Like we just have this heritage of caring about the child, not just about birth.
Yeah. Well, so in a practical sense, and we're going to get into something here now where anything we say is going to light fires on one side or the other. So I think to your point, I have never been a part of or associated with a church in any way that wasn't involved in the things that you described. So pregnancy help centers, oftentimes what they have is these women come in and they're like, I'm pregnant and I don't know if I want to keep the baby. I don't even know the first thing about, usually they're like, I don't even know what my body's doing right now. I don't even know the process of it. And basically what they know is from movies and they're like, I have no money. Like my parents are going to kill me. I don't want to, I don't know if I want to do this or not. And typically they provide things like education, right? Prenatal education that kind of have other people come in and walk alongside these women as they go. There's financial provisions for them. And then on the other side of that, when the baby is born, they can help walk through the adoption process. But typically what they love doing is watching these mothers just fall in love with their babies and then helping them and giving them what they need, whether it is like, my mom never showed me what this looks like. My mom was, not invested for these reasons. My dad was out of the picture for these reasons. I don't know what it's like to be a mother. I basically raised myself. How do I do this? And they provide clothes and diapers and formula and then education. And they have these older women that have done this be able to come in and help them along those processes. And
connection to churches, for spiritual
churches,
support.
Yeah. And then if the woman's like, hey, I don't want an abortion, but I can't keep this baby for whatever reason. Maybe it's fears or some reality, that we don't understand. but that they can't have this baby. They help with the adoption process. Every church I've ever been a part of, there are adopted babies that are in those churches where these women have given birth to these babies, and there have been adoption processes. And I'll give you one example, and there's probably people who are going to disagree or try to judge my motives in this, but there was one scenario where there was this young woman that had gotten pregnant in high school, and she didn't want an abortion, but she didn't want to, her parents would like basically disown her, and then she was going to lose a scholarship. And among other things, we did want to do whatever it took for that life. And we knew that the girl herself didn't want an abortion, but she also was like, I can't have this baby. And she had her own reasons. And so what we tried to do is make it, the best we could, cover whatever we could. We were willing to come and help meet with the parents. We offered what she was going to receive in scholarships to her school. I personally offered to pay that amount to her. There was people willing to adopt the baby, pay medical expenses, cart to and fro wherever she needed to go for this labor process, and basically cover all of the things that she was fearful of. And it was very complicated at the end, because once you remove all the practical reasons or excuses, what you're left with is really what you want and what you value. And some would argue that that situation, so the situation did end with an abortion, which was heartbreaking, but we loved that girl 1,000% the entire way. And we didn't abandon her either when she made that decision, because we know that's a hard decision to make, even though I would say that I think it was the wrong decision. We still had sympathy and compassion and love for her and helped her along her way after that too. But it came down to, there are certain values in her life with her parents and perceptions and career that she just decided that I don't want to deal with this. And we did everything we could to meet every demand, and on both sides of things. And that's, to be honest, what I see from an authentic church. That's what I've seen hundreds of times, is doing everything that we can on both ends of those pregnancies. And so I agree.
That stuff happens quietly, constantly.
Yeah. Well, that is true. That's probably a really good point, that we're probably not posting on Facebook every good deed we think we try to do. And so you're not going to see all of the love and care. And, well, I guess I'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah. That's it. I'm out of dumb things I've seen on social media. I'm sure I could come up with
So
quite the list, but
yeah,
those were just the top 5 off of my head.
Yeah,
that I could think of.
So here's what I wanted to leave people with. So I know a difficult conversation, a difficult subject, but I wanted to leave people with something. And so between now and when you start seeing those things hit ballot boxes, and you have to vote, and you're trying to figure out how to have these conversations, or maybe you're listening to this and you're immediately angered by where CJ and I stand because you've been able to connect dots. I think what I'd ask is not the only verse, not the only chapter of the Bible, but a good one to go into, not to just look at how God views a baby in the womb, but how God cares for people and loves people. There's probably 1,000 verses to go to, but Psalms 139 is almost too stereotypical for me to request you read. But as you read it, you see more than just the mother's womb section. You see the love and care of God for his people. And so I would encourage you to read Psalm 139 and prayerfully consider these things. And if you see part 2 of this conversation, I would encourage you to take a listen and see where we come out on this. And if you're a follower of Jesus and you believe there should be regulation on abortion due to it being life and the Imago Dei life, and there should be protections for the ones who can't speak and protections for the weak, you have a responsibility to know why you believe what you believe, and to be able to articulate that to people who have authentic questions about why you believe that. Otherwise, sometimes you can be a person that has the right belief system, but you're just too darn stupid to know how to communicate that to somebody. And so my hope is that after another conversation or two in this, that we can begin to move forward and do something with the water that has flowed to the states. All right, well, thanks again, and we hope that this was a gentle conversation and was helpful, and you can be expecting another couple good conversations coming up, good podcasts, one including biblical womanhood and what that looks like from the women who have walked through that process and get some practical things on what does that look like in their life. Also, we have a conversation on what does Christian dating look like and things like that. So very good stuff coming up. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you another time. All right, bye.